My name is Aaron, 32 years old, sitting at my parents' suburban dining table. Everyone laughed when Dad announced Sarah would crash at my downtown apartment while her place was being renovated. The conversation froze when I stood up and said, "Funny, I actually haven't lived there for 6 weeks." Mom's voice trembled. "Wait then, where exactly have you been staying?" Their smiles vanished as my truth hung in the air. Nobody had noticed my absence. Nobody had really asked how I was doing. Nobody knew I had nowhere to call home. Before I tell you my story, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like button if you've ever felt invisible to the people who should know you best. 4 months ago, my life looked perfect on paper. I worked as a financial analyst at Riverside Capital, pulling in a 6-figure salary, analyzing market trends and investment opportunities. My apartment in Westlake Towers cost nearly $3,000 monthly, but the panoramic city views and rooftop pool seemed worth every penny. The sleek furniture and state-of-the-art entertainment system projected the image of success I thought I needed to maintain. My relationship with my family was cordial but distant. Every Sunday evening, I called my mother with carefully curated updates about my life. I shared stories about client dinners at upscale restaurants and mentioned the occasional promotion, but never the crushing workload or growing emptiness I felt. She would listen attentively, occasionally interrupting with questions about when I might meet someone special or come visit more often. Sarah and I were close growing up. Only 2 years apart, we shared secrets, defended each other against bullies, and spent summers building elaborate forts in our backyard. But adult life pulled us in different directions. She pursued fashion design while I followed our father's footsteps into finance. Our conversations became shorter and less frequent, usually limited to holiday gatherings where we'd exchange pleasant but superficial updates. Dad never missed an opportunity to compare my achievements to those of his colleagues' sons. At family dinners, he'd casually mention how Patrick Sullivan had just made partner at his law firm, or how Michael Reynolds had purchased his second investment property. His words always carried an unspoken question: "Why aren't you doing better?" Each comparison chipped away at my confidence, though I never let it show. The first warning signs appeared during a quarterly meeting at Riverside. The executive team announced a temporary freeze on bonuses due to market volatility. 2 weeks later, the company eliminated the free lunch program and reduced our expense accounts. Small changes, but concerning for a firm that had always prided itself on generous perks. Whispers of layoffs began circulating through the office. At first, I dismissed them as typical corporate paranoia. Then I noticed the closed-door meetings, the unusual presence of consultants analyzing departmental workflows, and the sudden departure of several senior managers with vague explanations about pursuing other opportunities. Despite mounting evidence, I refused to believe my position might be at risk. I'd been with Riverside for 7 years, consistently received positive performance reviews, and managed several high-value client portfolios. Surely that counted for something. I continued my routine, working 12-hour days and spending weekends catching up on reports, ignoring the knot of anxiety growing in my stomach. My apartment had been my sanctuary for 5 years. I remembered the day I signed the lease, how the leasing agent had smiled approvingly at my financial credentials and welcomed me to the building's exclusive community. Each piece of furniture I'd purchased represented a milestone. The leather sectional celebrated my first big bonus. The handcrafted dining table marked my 30th birthday. The original artwork on the walls reflected my evolving taste and growing disposable income. That apartment wasn't just where I lived, it was who I was. It validated the years of education, the countless overtime hours, the missed family gatherings and neglected friendships. When colleagues or dates visited, their impressed reactions reaffirmed that my sacrifices had been worthwhile. The thought of losing it was unimaginable, so I simply refused to entertain the possibility, even as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The pressure to maintain appearances consumed an increasing portion of my income. Designer clothes, expensive haircuts, and regular dinner reservations at trendy restaurants weren't luxuries in my world. They were necessities. The firm expected its analysts to embody success, and clients responded better to polished professionals who seemed to have it all figured out. Between rent car payments, student loan installments, and the lifestyle expenses I deemed essential, my monthly financial obligations left little room for substantial savings. I maintained a modest emergency fund, but not nearly enough to weather a prolonged period of unemployment. This precarious balance worked perfectly as long as my income remained stable. I never seriously considered what might happen if that delicate equation changed. As economic indicators continued to deteriorate, I doubled down on my work efforts, hoping exceptional performance might shield me from potential cuts. I volunteered for additional projects, arrived earlier, stayed later, and never declined an assignment no matter how unreasonable the deadline. The dark circles under my eyes deepened, but I convinced myself this temporary strain would secure my future. I couldn't have been more wrong. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, short and to the point: mandatory company meeting at 11 o'clock in the main conference room. No agenda attached, no explanation provided. The knot in my stomach tightened as I exchanged nervous glances with colleagues. We knew what was coming, though nobody dared say it aloud. At precisely 11, our CEO, Richard Thornton, entered the room flanked by unfamiliar men in expensive suits. He looked exhausted, his normally confident demeanor replaced with grim resignation. Without preamble, he announced that Riverside Capital had filed for bankruptcy protection. A series of high-risk investments had failed catastrophically, and the firm's financial position was untenable. Operations would cease immediately. The room erupted in chaos. Some people shouted questions, others sat in stunned silence, and a few began openly weeping. The HR director explained we would receive 2 weeks severance pay compensation for unused vacation time and assistance with unemployment benefit applications. Our health insurance would continue until the end of the month, just 17 days away. By afternoon, security personnel supervised as we cleared our desks. I packed 7 years of professional life into a cardboard box: plastic awards commemorating successful deals, a framed business degree that had once seemed so valuable, and a few personal items that had decorated my workspace. The building access cards we surrendered on our way out, officially transforming from valued employees to unemployed statistics in less than 4 hours. That evening, I crafted an impressive resume, highlighting my accomplishments and downplaying the firm's dramatic collapse. I created profiles on every job search platform, set up alerts for financial analyst positions, and emailed former colleagues who had moved to other companies. The initial shock gave way to determined optimism. With my experience and track record, surely finding a new position would take weeks, not months. Reality proved far harsher. The financial sector was contracting across the board, with even stable institutions implementing hiring freezes. For every suitable opening, hundreds of qualified candidates competed. I secured several interviews during those first weeks, but each ended with the same polite rejection. We were impressed with your qualifications, but have selected a candidate whose experience better aligns with our current needs. By the 6th week of unemployment, my emergency fund had dwindled alarmingly. I cut all discretionary spending, canceled subscriptions, and limited meals to inexpensive basics. Still, the mathematics remained unforgiving. Without income, I could not sustain my essential expenses much longer. The rent payment loomed largest of all, consuming nearly 60% of my remaining resources. When my landlord Jeffrey called, I let it go to voicemail. The message confirmed my fears. "Aaron, this is the 3rd notice regarding your overdue rent. Please contact the management office immediately to discuss payment or vacate options." I had 48 hours before formal eviction proceedings would begin. That night, I made the hardest decision of my adult life. Taking only what would fit in my car, essential clothing, toiletries, important documents, laptop, and a few sentimental items, I left my apartment keys on the kitchen counter and walked away from the life I had built. The shame of failure burned hotter than any other emotion as I drove away from Westlake Towers at 2 in the morning, streetlights blurring through tears I refused to acknowledge. The following day, Mom called during her weekly check-in. I sat in my car, parked outside a coffee shop to use their Wi-Fi, and fabricated a story about just returning from a business lunch. Yes, work was going well. No, I couldn't visit this weekend due to an important project deadline. I maintained the fiction of my former life, the words tasting like ashes as I watched a barista close up shop through the cafe's window. I spent the next day sorting my possessions. Winter clothing and professional suits went into a small storage unit I could still afford for a few months. Electronics and designer accessories were sold to a pawn shop for a fraction of their value. Most of my furniture and household items simply remained in the abandoned apartment property I would never reclaim. On what became my final day as a resident of Westlake Towers, I stood in the empty living room remembering the dinner parties, quiet evenings, and ambitious dreams that had filled the space. The panoramic windows framed the city skyline lights, twinkling against the darkening sky. For years I had measured my worth through possessions and appearances. Now, with everything stripped away, I confronted a terrifying question without the trappings of success. Who was I? The first night in my car, parked in a 24-hour supermarket lot, I barely slept. Every passing vehicle, every distant voice triggered immediate anxiety. I reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go, covered myself with a jacket, and tried to convince myself this was temporary, a brief detour before resuming my proper life. Morning arrived with stiff muscles, a desperate need for a bathroom, and the crushing realization that I had nowhere to go. I discovered that a basic membership at National Fitness cost only $30 monthly and provided access to showers, bathrooms, and climate-controlled spaces. Each morning I would arrive at 5:30, exercise half-heartedly to maintain appearances, then shower and change into clean clothes. I kept a small toiletry kit in my gym bag with shaving supplies, deodorant, and hair products, maintaining the external standards of my former life, even as its foundation crumbled. The public library became my office from 9 to 5. Free Wi-Fi, quiet study rooms, and computer access allowed me to continue my job search while protecting my laptop battery for evening use. Librarians never questioned my daily presence, assuming I was a graduate student or remote worker. Between applications, I researched unemployment benefits, affordable housing options, and food assistance programs. Information I had once considered irrelevant to someone of my education and background. During my second week of homelessness, I encountered Marcus at a community meal program I had reluctantly visited. In his 50s, with weathered features and alert eyes, he immediately recognized my newcomer status. First time without an address, he asked without judgment. When I nodded, embarrassed, he offered practical advice that would prove invaluable: where to safely park overnight, which public bathrooms were clean and accessible, how to maintain cell phone service on minimal funds. His matter-of-fact approach to survival skills made my situation seem less shameful, more like a challenge requiring specific expertise. Marcus introduced me to the reality of shelter life, though I initially resisted. Too dangerous, I argued, having heard stories of theft and violence. Sometimes, he acknowledged, but freezing in your car has its own risks. At least know your options. He walked me through the process: registration times, identification requirements, and critical rules. Most importantly, he emphasized the unwritten social codes that govern these spaces: who to avoid, when to keep to yourself, and how to protect your few remaining possessions. My third week without housing coincided with an unexpected cold snap. After a night when temperatures dropped to near freezing, I reluctantly visited the downtown community shelter. The intake process was surprisingly bureaucratic: forms, documenting my identity, medical history, and employment status. The overnight accommodations consisted of narrow cots, arranged in rows separated by just enough space to move between them. Privacy was non-existent, but the warmth and security outweighed these discomforts. At the shelter, I met people whose stories defied my previous stereotypes. Thomas, a former accountant whose medical bills after a heart attack had depleted his savings. Diane, who had fled domestic violence with only the clothes she wore. Jason, a veteran struggling with PTSD and unable to maintain steady employment. Their resilience in the face of circumstances far more challenging than mine provided perspective I desperately needed. The following week brought a small victory: a part-time position at Martin's grocery, stocking shelves during overnight hours. The pay was barely $9 hourly, far below what I once earned in a single billable hour, but it provided immediate income and crucially occurred when the store was closed to customers. I could work without fear of being recognized by former colleagues or clients. The physical labor exhausted me initially, but also granted dreamless sleep during daylight hours, usually in my car parked in quiet residential areas. Maintaining the appearance of stability required constant vigilance. I established a rotation of different outfits carefully preserved from my former wardrobe. A portable phone charger ensured I never missed calls from potential employers. I used laundromats weekly, splurging on detergent that matched the expensive brand I once used without thought. These small consistencies preserved a tenuous connection to my previous identity. During my 4th week without permanent housing, I reconnected with Leo, a college roommate I hadn't seen in years. We bumped into each other at a coffee shop where I was using the free Wi-Fi. After awkward catching up, I manufactured a story about apartment renovations and needing temporary accommodations. Leo offered his spare room without hesitation, waving away my offers to contribute toward utilities. "Just buy groceries occasionally," he said, with the casual generosity of someone who had never questioned their housing security. Leo's apartment provided blessed normalcy: a private bedroom, regular showers, kitchen access, and the simple luxury of watching television on a comfortable couch. For nearly 2 weeks, I experienced physical comfort while continuing my increasingly desperate job search. But close quarters revealed the gulf between our realities. Leo complained about minor workplace frustrations while I silently contemplated which possessions I might sell next. He casually ordered delivery meals that cost more than my daily budget. The cognitive dissonance grew unbearable. The arrangement collapsed after 13 days. Leo returned home unexpectedly during afternoon hours when he normally worked, finding me methodically portioning discount pasta into individual meals. Something about this scene, the desperation, evident in my careful rationing, triggered questions I wasn't prepared to answer. Under pressure, I revealed fragments of my situation. His initial sympathy quickly transformed into uncomfortable pity, changing the dynamic between us irrevocably. 3 days later, citing an unexpected visit from his parents, Leo apologetically asked how long until my apartment situation would be resolved. That night, with nowhere else to go, I slept in Kennedy Park, huddled on a bench with my backpack clutched against my chest. A police officer woke me shortly after dawn, firmly but not unkindly explaining that overnight camping wasn't permitted. As I gathered my belongings, avoiding his gaze, I reached the lowest point of my journey. The carefully constructed facade of temporary displacement crumbled, revealing the truth I had been avoiding. I was homeless, with no clear path back to my former life. The financial analyst with the corner office and impressive client portfolio had disappeared, replaced by a man counting coins for coffee and hoping to find a public restroom before the morning rush. My mother's call came late Thursday afternoon, her cheerful voice a stark contrast to my surroundings in the library reference section. "Aaron, honey, we haven't seen you in ages. Your father and I are hosting a family dinner this Sunday, and Sarah will be there. No excuses this time, you simply must come." The invitation landed like a summons impossible to refuse without raising suspicions. With forced enthusiasm, I accepted, immediately calculating what preparations would be necessary to maintain my increasingly fragile deception. Sunday loomed like an impending audit requiring meticulous attention to appearance details. I could not arrive looking like a man who'd been sleeping in his car. Marcus, surprisingly understanding of my dilemma, loaned me a freshly ironed button-down shirt from his own limited wardrobe. "Family sees deeper than strangers," he warned while handing over the garment. "Be careful what story you tell with your eyes." His words haunted me as I prepared, practicing neutral expressions in the gym bathroom mirror. My parents' home in Oak Ridge Estates remained exactly as I remembered: massive colonial architecture, perfectly manicured lawn, and gleaming luxury vehicles in the circular driveway. I parked my unwashed sedan at the street curb, hoping distance would minimize comparison. For a moment, I sat motionless, gathering courage to enter a world that now felt foreign. This house, with its 5 bedrooms and grand staircase, had once been simply home. Now it represented a standard of living that had slipped beyond my grasp. Sarah arrived moments after I did, emerging from her sleek convertible with the confident bearing of someone secure in their professional identity. At 30, my younger sister had established herself as an emerging talent in fashion design, recently featured in industry publications and consulted by regional retailers. Her stylish appearance, hair, professionally colored clothing, obviously designer, made my carefully assembled outfit feel even more inadequate. We exchanged brief hugs in the driveway, her expensive perfume momentarily overwhelming. "You look tired," she observed with characteristic directness. "Working too hard." "Always," I replied, grateful for the assumption that employment explained my exhaustion. Mom fussed over us in the entryway, commenting on my apparent weight loss, with a mixture of concern and approval. Dad greeted me with his standard assessment eyes, quickly cataloging my appearance, posture, and demeanor before offering a firm handshake. These familiar dynamics momentarily comforted me. The script hadn't changed, even if my circumstances had dramatically. Dinner progressed with predictable patterns. Dad dominated conversation with commentary on economic trends and political developments. Mom interjected with neighborhood updates and questions about our personal lives. Sarah enthusiastically described her recent professional successes, a collaboration with a national clothing brand, an upcoming feature in a major magazine. I contributed vague anecdotes about market analysis and client meetings, constructing elaborate fictions from my former reality. The breaking point arrived with dessert. Mom placed homemade apple pie on the table while Dad refreshed our drinks. The conversation had turned to Sarah's housing situation. Her landlord was selling her building, necessitating a move with limited notice. She described the competitive rental market with animated frustration, detailing application fees and bidding wars for desirable properties. Well, Dad announced with sudden inspiration, that's easily solved. Aaron has that spacious downtown apartment just sitting there most of the time. Sarah can stay with you for a few weeks while finding something suitable. He turned to me with the satisfied expression of someone who'd efficiently solved a problem. That building of yours has excellent security, and the location would be perfect for her. Mom immediately endorsed the plan. Oh, that's wonderful. You two haven't spent time together in years. Like when you were children sharing that bedroom during the renovation. She turned to Sarah. Aaron barely uses that beautiful place anyway, always at the office or traveling for work. They continued elaborating on this perfect solution, outlining logistics and advantages, their voices, creating a surreal backdrop to my internal panic. Sarah watched me carefully, perhaps noticing my discomfort but misinterpreting its cause. The pressure built until breathing became difficult. The room suddenly too warm, the charade unsustainable. Funny thing about that, I interrupted, my voice unexpectedly steady. I actually haven't lived there for 6 weeks. The statement dropped into momentary silence before my mother nervously laughed. What do you mean, dear? Are you traveling for work? Number. The single syllable hung between us. I don't live there anymore. I can't afford it. Can't afford it, Dad repeated, confusion evident. But your position at Riverside. Riverside Capital filed for bankruptcy almost 2 months ago. Everyone was laid off. I haven't had steady income since then. Each admission loosened another word, suddenly tumbling out beyond my control. I couldn't make rent. I left before formal eviction. Mom's wine glass trembled as she set it down. Wait, she whispered, genuine fear entering her expression. Then where exactly have you been staying? I looked at their shocked faces, the comfortable suburban parents, who had always seen me as the responsible, successful son. The weight of their expectations, and my failure to meet them, had prevented this confession for weeks. Now, having begun, I couldn't stop. Various places, I answered vaguely. My car sometimes. A shelter downtown when it's cold. A shelter, Dad thundered, disbelief coloring his response. Like a homeless shelter. You're telling us you've been living in homeless shelters? Sarah remained silent, her expression unreadable as she processed this revelation. Why didn't you call us? Mom demanded, tears forming. How could you not tell us something this important? The irony of her question almost made me laugh. How could I not tell them? The same way I hadn't told them about crushing student debt, toxic workplace culture, or profound loneliness. The same way our family handled all uncomfortable truths, by simply pretending they didn't exist. You always seem so busy, I responded with deliberate calm. I didn't want to worry you. Dad stood abruptly, pacing the dining room with agitated energy. This is completely irresponsible, Aaron. There are procedures for these situations, resources available, unemployment benefits, temporary assistance programs. He spoke as if reading from a financial planning brochure, reducing my crisis to an administrative oversight. I've applied for everything, I countered, feeling defensive heat rise. The systems are overwhelmed. Processing takes weeks, sometimes months. Rent doesn't wait for bureaucratic approvals. Mom repeatedly murmured, I don't understand, while dabbing at tears, each repetition like an accusation. Sarah remained unnaturally still, observing our families unraveling with analytical distance. So you've been, what, living like some vagrant dad? Continued his voice, rising with each word. After everything we've invested in your education, all those opportunities, and you just throw it away without even consulting us. The criticism penetrated my fragile composure, igniting long-suppressed resentment. All the comparisons implied disappointments, and conditional approval converged into a molten core of anger. This wasn't simply about recent events, but years of measuring my worth through external achievements, a value system I'd internalized so completely that unemployment had rendered me worthless in my own estimation. Consulting you, I stood to face him directly. Like when exactly? During the holiday dinners, when you compare my accomplishments to everyone else's sons, or maybe during the phone calls that always end with questions about my next promotion. The floodgates had opened, releasing years of topple, unspoken truth. You haven't been interested in my actual life, only the version that validated your parenting. Mom gasped at this unprecedented confrontation. Dad's face flushed with indignation or recognition, I couldn't tell which. The carefully maintained politeness governing our family interactions had shattered beyond repair, leaving raw honesty in its place. "How dare you?" Dad responded, voice dangerously quiet. "After everything we've given you, the opportunities, the connections, the advantages most people would be grateful for." His controlled tone signaled deeper anger than any shouting could convey. "And this is how you repay that investment, by throwing away a promising career and living like a vagabond." The word investment triggered something primal in me. Is that what I am to you? An investment? A return you expected on your parental contributions? I gestured around the dining room, encompassing the visible symbols of upper-middle-class success. What terrifies you more, Dad? That I'm struggling, or that my struggle might reflect poorly on you at the country club? Mom intervened, voice quavering. "Aaron, please. Your father doesn't deserve that. We're just trying to understand how things got so bad without us knowing." Her pleading expression carried genuine confusion. "We talk every week. You never mentioned any problems." "We don't talk, Mom. We exchange pleasantries. You ask predictable questions and I provide acceptable answers." The brutal honesty felt simultaneously destructive and liberating. "When have we ever discussed anything real, anything difficult? Remember when I was passed over for promotion 3 years ago, I told you I was exploring other opportunities within the company, instead of admitting I was devastated." Her eyes widened with recognition. "But why wouldn't you tell us? We're your parents." "Because disappointment is the one emotion this family cannot tolerate." I turned back to my father. "Isn't that right, Dad? Weakness, failure, uncertainty, those are indulgences for other people's children. The Thompsons raise achievers, not failures." Dad slammed his hand against the table, rattling dishes. "Enough. This self-pitying display solves nothing. If you'd simply called when the problems began, arrangements could have been made. Instead, you've been sleeping in your car, and God knows where else, while perfectly good solutions went unexplored." "Like what solutions?" I challenged. "Moving back home at 32, admitting complete professional failure, becoming another cautionary tale you share with colleagues about entitled millennials." "Yes, if necessary," he shouted, finally losing composure. "That's what family does. But you were too proud, too stubborn to ask for help, and now you have the audacity to blame us for not reading your mind." The accusation contained enough truth to sting. Pride had indeed prevented me from reaching out, but it was pride had instilled through years of conditional approval. The impossible standards that had driven my academic and professional achievements had also created this paralysis, the inability to admit vulnerability or seek assistance. "You taught me that, Dad." My voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "You taught me that asking for help is weakness, that self-sufficiency is the only acceptable approach, that problems should be handled privately, efficiently, without burdening others." I met his gaze directly. "I learned that lesson too well." Mom began openly crying, her carefully applied makeup creating dark streaks down her cheeks. "I had no idea you felt this way. All these years." She looked genuinely shocked, as if discovering she'd been living with strangers. Aaron, we would have helped. Of course we would have helped. Would you? I asked, not unkindly. Remember my sophomore year, when I wanted to change majors? When I said finance wasn't fulfilling, you both treated it like a temporary confusion, something to overcome rather than explore. The memory remained surprisingly painful despite the years. Dad said, "I'd find meaning through success, that passion was a luxury compared to security." Before Dad could respond, Sarah suddenly spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. "He's right." We all turned, almost surprised to remember her presence. "Everything Aaron is saying is absolutely right. This family doesn't handle deviation from the script. We never have." Dad looked betrayed by this unexpected alliance. "Sarah, don't encourage this victim mentality. Your brother has made a series of poor decisions." Like I did, she interrupted, something dangerous flashing in her expression. "When I chose design school instead of business, when I moved to Chicago without a job offer, you predicted complete failure. Remember, said I'd be home within 6 months, begging for help." Mom reached toward her. "Honey, that was years ago. Your father was just concerned." He was controlling. Sarah corrected flatly, "Using financial support as leverage to direct our choices. The difference is, I defied him openly while Aaron tried to comply." She turned to me with newfound understanding. "That's why this hit you harder, isn't it? You actually believed in the system. You played by all the rules, checked all the boxes, and still ended up without a safety net." Her perception stunned me. Throughout childhood, I'd envied Sarah's rebellious courage, her willingness to challenge our father's authority. I'd chosen the path of compliance, seeking approval through achievement. When the carefully constructed framework collapsed, I had no alternative identity to fall back on. "This isn't about ancient history," Dad insisted, clearly uncomfortable with this unified critique. "It's about Aaron's current irresponsibility, hiding his situation, deceiving us for weeks, because he knew exactly how you'd react," Sarah exclaimed, "with judgment instead of compassion, with lectures instead of support." She stood, moving to my side, in a physical demonstration of solidarity. "And guess what? You're proving him right with every word." Mom looked between us, seemingly realizing for the first time that both her children shared this perception. "I had no idea you both felt this way," she whispered. "All I ever wanted was for you to be secure, to have opportunities we didn't have growing up." "We know, Mom," I acknowledged, softening slightly at her evident distress. "But somewhere along the way, achievement became the only acceptable outcome. Struggle became shameful. Mistakes became unforgivable." "That's completely unfair," Dad protested, though with less conviction. "Parents want their children to succeed, to avoid unnecessary hardships. What's wrong with high expectations?" "Nothing," Sarah answered. "Unless they leave no room for humanity, for learning through failure, for asking for help when it's needed." She turned to me, which brings us back to now. "Aaron needs help, and he shouldn't have to grovel for it." Dad straightened, professional mask sliding back into place. "No one suggested groveling, but some accountability seems reasonable. Some recognition that concealing the situation was inappropriate." The familiar dynamic threatened to reassert itself, Dad establishing conditions for assistance, requiring demonstrations of remorse before offering support. In the past, I'd have acquiesced, accepting blame to restore familial harmony. Tonight, something fundamental had shifted. "I'm not asking for anything," I stated clearly. "I didn't come here planning to reveal any of this. You suggested Sarah stay at an apartment I no longer have, and the truth emerged. That's all." I began gathering my keys and phone. "I appreciate your concern, but I need to go." "Go where?" Mom asked, panic edging her voice. "Aaron, you can't possibly leave like this. We need to figure something out." "I've been figuring it out for 6 weeks," I replied, surprising myself with the steady confidence in my voice. "I'll continue doing so." "This is ridiculous," Dad declared. "You're being childish and dramatic. Sit down so we can discuss this rationally." "I'm leaving now," I repeated, moving toward the front door. "Thank you for dinner." Mom followed, clutching my arm. "Aaron, please. This is your home. You can stay here tonight, at least until we sort things out." The offer tempted me. Sofa cushions instead of car seats guaranteed warmth and safety. But accepting now after this confrontation would reset the pattern. Tomorrow would bring negotiations, conditions, subtle reminders of my dependence. The temporary comfort wasn't worth the psychological cost. "I can't, Mom. Not tonight." I gently disengaged from her grip. "I need some space to think." Dad remained in the dining room, pride preventing pursuit. His final words followed me to the door. "When you're ready to discuss this maturely without accusations and theatrics, well, be here." The night air felt cleansing after the emotional intensity indoors. As I reached my car, rapid footsteps approached from behind. Sarah followed, keys in hand. "Aaron, wait." She caught up slightly, breathless. "That was intense. Are you really going back to?" She hesitated, unsure how to describe my current accommodations. "I have options," I answered vaguely. "I'm not in danger." She studied me with the direct gaze that had intimidated childhood bullies. "Bullshit. You're living in your car." When I didn't deny it, she continued, "This can't continue. Not because Dad says so, but because you're my brother and I won't allow it." "It's not your problem to solve, Sarah." "Family isn't a problem to solve," she countered, unconsciously echoing our father. "It's who shows up when things fall apart." She blocked my path to the driver's door. "We're talking. Not here, not with them, but somewhere. Tonight." As I considered refusing, my phone vibrated repeatedly. Texts from Mom, increasingly desperate. "Please come back inside. We can work this out together. Don't disappear again. We're worried about you." Each message carried genuine concern beneath the controlling impulse. Despite everything, they loved me, in their flawed, complicated way. The realization didn't solve my practical problems, but it offered something: I'd been missing: perspective on my place within the complex ecosystem of family. Sarah insisted on driving, claiming her car had a full tank of gas, a transparent excuse to prevent my potential escape. We sat in silence initially, the evening's revelations still reverberating between us. She navigated toward downtown, seemingly without specific destination, until spotting an all-night diner with minimal patronage. "Perfect," she declared, pulling into the parking lot. "Neutral territory with coffee." The vinyl booth squeaked as we settled opposite each other. A tired waitress brought menus and coffee without prompting, then retreated to give us privacy. The fluorescent lighting emphasized Sarah's exhaustion, revealing stress lines typically concealed by careful makeup. For the first time, I noticed signs of struggle beneath her polished exterior. So she began, after taking a fortifying sip: "Homelessness. Not exactly the trajectory Dad mapped out for his golden boy." The statement could have sounded cruel, but her tone conveyed solidarity rather than judgment. "Life comes at you fast," I replied with attempted lightness, though the humor fell flat. "One day you're analyzing hedge fund performance, the next you're analyzing which public bathroom has the best paper towels." "Stop it," she said sharply. "Don't make jokes. This isn't something to minimize." She leaned forward, lowering her voice despite our solitude. "Where have you actually been staying? The complete truth, this time." The direct question stripped away remaining pretense. With halting sentences, I described the progression: my car, the community shelter, brief respite at Leo's apartment, then back to increasingly desperate arrangements. I explained the daily challenges of maintaining basic hygiene, securing food, preserving my phone service, and continuing the job search despite mounting obstacles. Throughout my account, Sarah listened without interruption, her expression shifting between shock, sympathy, and occasional anger. "Why didn't you call me?" She finally asked, the question simpler and more devastating than our parents' identical inquiry. "Not them, I understand that completely. But me." The truth was complicated. Pride mostly, I admitted. "You were always the brave one, forging your own path despite Dad's disapproval. I was the rule follower, the one who played it safe. Calling you meant admitting I'd failed at the only thing I was supposed to be good at: security and stability." "That's ridiculous," she replied, though without heat. "You think I haven't struggled? That my life is some uninterrupted success story?" Something in her tone caught my attention. "What do you mean?" She twisted her coffee cup, eyes fixed on the swirling liquid. "Remember how I mentioned needing temporary housing? That wasn't entirely honest." A bitter smile curved her lips. My landlord isn't selling the building. Max and I split up 3 months ago. I'm moving because I can't afford the rent alone, and because staying there. She paused, composing herself. Let's just say the memories aren't great. This revelation stunned me. You and Max broke up, but you were together for years. I thought wedding plans were underway. They were, until I discovered his extracurricular activities with my former assistant. Her attempt at nonchalance couldn't disguise the pain beneath. Classic story, really. Late nights at the office, unexplained expenses, deleted text messages. I confronted him. He denied everything, then finally admitted it had been going on for nearly a year. Sarah, I'm so sorry. Why didn't you tell anyone? Same reason you didn't. The Thompson family doesn't do failure, remember? Besides, can you imagine Dad's reaction? He'd have given me that disappointed look before launching into all the warning signs he apparently noticed, but didn't mention. Her accuracy in predicting our father's response made us both laugh, breaking tension momentarily. But your career is thriving, I noted, recalling her dinner table announcements. The collaborations, the magazine feature. Smoke and mirrors, she interrupted. The collaboration pays practically nothing, it's for exposure. The magazine feature is genuine, but magazines don't pay bills. My savings are nearly depleted, and design contracts have dried up in this economy. She met my gaze directly. We're both struggling, Aaron. I've just maintained the illusion better. This shared vulnerability created connection deeper than anything we'd experienced in adulthood. We were both casualties of economic instability and familial expectations, each suffering privately rather than risking disappointment or judgment. The realization transformed my perception from isolation to kinship. So what now, I asked the question, encompassing our individual situations and fractured family dynamics. First, practical matters, she replied with characteristic efficiency. You're not spending another night in your car or a shelter. I've been staying with my friend Melissa temporarily, and her couch is available until we figure out something better. Sarah, Chant. You can and will, she interrupted firmly. This isn't charity, it's family. The real kind, not Dad's conditional version. Over the next hour, we developed a tentative plan. Sarah would accelerate her apartment search, looking for affordable 2-bedroom options where we could split costs. I would intensify job hunting, expanding beyond financial sector positions to consider alternative uses for my analytical skills. We agreed to establish boundaries with our parents, clear communication, but limited emotional engagement until healthier patterns could develop. The following morning, Sarah insisted we meet our parents again, this time at a coffee shop, her selection of neutral territory deliberate. They arrived looking haggard, evidently having slept poorly after our confrontation. Mom immediately attempted to embrace me, relief visible in her expression. Dad maintained reserved distance, uncertainty, replacing his usual confidence. Before anyone says anything, Sarah began, once wed, settled at a corner table. Let's establish some ground rules. No accusations, no lectures about responsibility or appropriate behavior. We're adults discussing a difficult situation constructively. Her tone brooked no argument, impressing me with its authoritative clarity. Mom nodded eagerly while Dad offered grudging assent. We were worried sick, Mom said, unable to contain herself. When you both left like that with Aaron in such a precarious situation, that's precisely what we need to address, Sarah continued. Aaron's housing and employment circumstances, without judgment about how they developed. Dad cleared his throat. It's difficult to separate the situation from the decisions that created it, he began carefully. But I recognize that my approach last night wasn't productive. This oblique acknowledgement represented significant concession from a man who rarely admitted error. I should have told you what was happening, I offered, extending a reciprocal olive branch. Regardless of anticipated reactions, keeping you in the dark wasn't fair or helpful. Mom reached across the table, squeezing my hand. I keep thinking about all those phone calls, Aaron. You sounded so normal, so fine, all while you were suffering. Genuine pain filled her expression. What kind of mother doesn't notice when her child is in crisis? The kind whose child deliberately conceals it, I answered gently. This isn't your failure, Mom. I became expert at projecting success, because I believed that's what you needed from me. We never meant to create that impression, she insisted, tears threatening. We only wanted the best for you both. Your definition of best has been somewhat narrow, Sarah observed, though without her previous anger. Success measured primarily through professional achievement and financial stability. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps that's fair criticism, he acknowledged with visible effort. My own upbringing emphasized material security above all else. When you're raised with scarcity, providing abundance for your children becomes paramount. This glimpse into his motivations offered context I'd never fully considered. My father worked 2 jobs, often sleeping only 4 hours nightly. He died at 57, worn out from constant labor. I promised myself my children would never face such constraints. This vulnerability from our typically stoic father created momentary silence. His revelation transformed his controlling tendencies from arbitrary authoritarianism to misguided protection. Something understandable, if still damaging. I appreciate that perspective, I said carefully. But security isn't just financial. Emotional security matters too. The knowledge that family support doesn't depend on achievement or compliance. Mom wiped away tears. Have we really made you feel that our love was conditional? Because nothing could be further from the truth. Not your love, Sarah clarified. But your approval, your respect, those have felt performance-based. Successes celebrated, struggles minimized or ignored. Dad appeared genuinely troubled by this characterization. That was never my conscious intention. He hesitated, then added with remarkable honesty, though I recognize patterns from my own father, he rarely acknowledged effort, only results. This intergenerational perspective softened my resentment. Dad had parented according to his own limited template, perpetuating patterns without fully examining their impact. Understanding didn't immediately heal the damage, but it offered a foundation for potential reconstruction. So where do we go from here? Mom asked the practical question, cutting through emotional complexity. Sarah and I have discussed initial steps, I explained, outlining our housing collaboration plan. I'm expanding my job search beyond financial analysis, considering adjacent fields where my skills might transfer. Dad nodded thoughtfully. I may have connections in related industries, corporate logistics, data analysis for healthcare systems. Would you be open to introductions? The offer came without his typical forceful direction, presented instead as optional assistance. I would appreciate that, I replied, surprising myself with the sincere response. Though I need to be clear that my next position might not match my previous salary or status. I'm reassessing priorities. Understandable, he said, further astonishing me with his acceptance. Success encompasses more than compensation. Personal fulfillment matters significantly. This philosophical shift suggested our confrontation had prompted genuine reflection. Mom turned to Sarah. And you, sweetheart. You mentioned housing changes, but not the circumstances. Is everything all right with Max? Sarah briefly explained the relationship dissolution, omitting infidelity details but conveying the financial implications. Rather than offering unsolicited advice or expressing disappointment about the failed relationship, Mom simply asked, what support would be helpful during this transition? This unprecedented approach, her seeking guidance rather than providing it, visibly moved Sarah. Just this, she answered softly. Listening without trying to fix everything. Understanding without judgment. Dad cleared his throat, evidently uncomfortable with emotional openness, but making sincere effort. I'm sorry you're both facing these challenges. And, he paused, the admission clearly difficult. I'm sorry if my expectations contributed to your reluctance to share them sooner. This approximation of apology, while imperfect, represented significant evolution. The carefully constructed facade of family perfection had cracked, allowing genuine connection through the fissures. We were seeing each other clearly, perhaps for the first time in our adult lives, not as projected ideals or disappointments, but as flawed humans navigating complex circumstances. 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of the modest 2-bedroom apartment Sarah and I now shared, preparing coffee before my morning shift. After weeks of searching, Shed found this reasonable rental in a transitioning neighborhood, not trendy enough for premium prices, but stable and convenient to public transportation. The furnishings represented an eclectic combination, our surviving possessions supplemented by second-hand finds, and a few carefully selected new items. Nothing matched perfectly, but the overall effect felt more authentically comfortable than my former design catalog living space. My employment situation had stabilized, though not in ways I would have predicted. After dozens of financial sector rejections, I had expanded my search parameters significantly. A small education technology startup had responded to my application for a data analysis position with surprising enthusiasm. The salary was approximately 40% less than my previous compensation, but the work environment offered advantages my corporate experience never had: flexibility, creativity, and genuine appreciation for contributions. Most importantly, I no longer experienced the gnawing emptiness that had accompanied my previous professional success. Sarah's design career had taken unexpected turns as well. Rather than pursuing high-profile fashion industry positions, she had established a growing clientele of small businesses needing affordable branding assistance. The work was steadier than her previous contracts, if less glamorous, and she had recently hired a part-time assistant to manage increasing demand. More significantly, she had begun teaching evening classes at the community college, discovering unexpected fulfillment in sharing her expertise with aspiring designers. Our weekly family dinners continued, though now rotating between various locations: our apartment, our parents' home, occasionally restaurants. The conversations had evolved dramatically, with genuine exchanges replacing performative updates. Dad still occasionally slipped into advice-giving mode, but caught himself more quickly, often with gentle reminders from Mom. She had undergone perhaps the most visible transformation, asking thoughtful questions and listening attentively to our authentic responses rather than seeking reassurance through our achievements. The relationship with Marcus had developed in unexpected ways. Rather than fading from my life once housing stabilized, he had become a regular presence. With my assistance navigating bureaucratic obstacles, he had secured subsidized housing and part-time employment as a maintenance worker. His practical wisdom and philosophical perspective frequently provided valuable counterbalance to my sometimes rigid thinking. We had recently begun volunteering together at the downtown shelter, offering guidance to newly displaced individuals, navigating systems Wed both experienced firsthand. The psychological healing progressed more gradually than practical circumstances. Nightmares about homelessness periodically disrupted my sleep, leaving me disoriented and anxious upon waking. Certain triggers: public bathrooms, the sound of car doors closing nearby. While I slept, the particular institutional smell of community spaces instantly transported me back to that vulnerable period. Sarah noticed these reactions, creating subtle accommodations without drawing attention to my lingering trauma. Financial security remained a work in progress. I maintained meticulous budgeting, tracking every expense with precision that occasionally bordered on obsessive. My emergency fund grew slowly but steadily, each addition providing incremental peace of mind. The apartment lease represented significant commitment, but sharing costs with Sarah made it manageable even with my reduced income. More importantly, our transparent communication about financial matters prevented the isolation that had characterized my previous crisis. Perhaps the most profound transformation occurred in my relationship with professional identity. Previously, I had defined myself almost exclusively through career achievements, measuring personal worth by income and title. This perspective had made unemployment catastrophic, not merely a practical challenge, but an existential threat. Gradually, I developed more nuanced self-valuation, recognizing contributions beyond economic productivity. My worth as friend, brother, son, community member existed independently from employment status, a revelation that would have seemed inconceivable months earlier. Dad and I established a new connection through his unexpected interest in my volunteer work. Initially skeptical about enabling dependency, his words he had reluctantly accompanied me to a shelter dinner service. The experience visibly affected him, challenging long-held assumptions about homelessness and economic stability. He began regular contributions to housing assistance programs, eventually joining a community board addressing affordable housing policy. Our conversations about systemic inequality and economic vulnerability would have been unimaginable in our previous relationship dynamic. Mom discovered renewed purpose, supporting families experiencing housing transitions. Her organizational skills and networking abilities proved invaluable to local nonprofits, while her genuine empathy created connections with clients that professional social workers sometimes struggled to establish. "I wish I'd found this 20 years ago," she confided during a volunteer event. "Making actual difference feels so much more meaningful than planning charity galas." Sarah's romantic life remained deliberately independent, her focus directed toward career development and personal healing. Maybe eventually she responded when Mom delicately inquired about dating. But right now, I'm enjoying discovering who I am without accommodating someone else's expectations. This self-determined approach represented significant growth from her previous pattern of relationship-centered identity. On a crisp autumn evening, Sarah and I sat on our small balcony mugs of tea, warming our hands as we watched sunset colors transform the urban landscape. The conversation drifted comfortably between practical matters and philosophical reflections, the ease between us a hard-won achievement after years of competitive distance. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. "The corner office expense account, prestigious address." I considered the question seriously. "Occasionally," I admitted. "Usually superficial aspects, the restaurant reservations, designer clothing, the visible markers of success. I watched a flock of birds navigate between buildings. But I don't miss who I was in that context, constantly anxious, emotionally isolated, measuring my value through external validation." She nodded thoughtfully. "I keep thinking about how we both maintain these elaborate facades even with each other. All that energy wasted pretending everything was perfect. The great Thompson family tradition I observed without bitterness. Excellence or silence, no middle ground. Until that dinner," she laughed softly, "when you dropped the nuclear truth bomb that changed everything." "Not exactly my finest moment," I acknowledged, remembering the raw confrontation. "But maybe necessary." "Definitely necessary," she corrected. "For all of us. Dad would never have questioned his assumptions without that catalyst. Mom would have continued believing our weekly updates reflected reality. We might never have found our way back to being actual siblings instead of competitive strangers." Her assessment resonated with my own reflections. The painful dismantling of pretense had created possibility for authentic connection. The external markers of success. I'd lost career prestige, luxury housing, material possessions, seemed increasingly hollow compared with the genuine relationships developed through vulnerability. The strangest part, I mused, is that losing everything I thought mattered eventually led to gaining what actually does. The insight wasn't particularly original, but its truth resonated deeply through lived experience rather than abstract understanding. Sarah raised her mug in mock toast. "To spectacular failure, then, and the freedom it unexpectedly provides." I matched her gesture, adding, "And to families that survive the truth, however uncomfortable." As sunset faded into evening, I reflected on the transformative journey from superficial success through devastating loss toward authentic recalibration. The path had been neither linear nor comfortable, with progress measured in small revelations rather than dramatic breakthroughs. The professional analyst in me recognized that by conventional metrics, wealth status, material security, my current circumstances represented significant downgrade. Yet by more meaningful standards, connection, purpose, internal peace, I had never been more successful. The greatest lesson emerged not from homelessness itself, but from surviving it with identity intact. External circumstances, however, challenging, need not define essential worth. Vulnerability properly shared strengthens rather than diminishes connections. And family at its best provides not just material safety, but emotional sanctuary, where truth can be spoken without fear of abandonment. This understanding didn't eliminate future challenges or guarantee continued stability. Economic uncertainty remained reality in an increasingly precarious employment landscape. Family relationships required ongoing maintenance, with old patterns occasionally resurfacing during stressful periods. Personal growth continued as work in progress rather than completed achievement. But these uncertainties no longer generated paralyzing fear, instead representing the natural complexity of authentic living. My journey from apparent success through hidden crisis toward genuine recalibration continues evolving each day, offering opportunities to practice newly discovered resilience. The external markers of status once deemed essential now appear as optional accessories rather than core requirements for meaningful existence. In their place, I've discovered sustainable values, community connection, creative contribution, presence during both struggle and celebration. These provide foundations sturdy enough to withstand inevitable uncertainties ahead. Have you ever had to redefine your definition of success after experiencing significant setbacks? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please consider subscribing to hear more authentic stories about life's unexpected challenges. Your support through likes and shares helps these narratives reach others who might be silently struggling. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes our greatest growth happens when life doesn't go according to plan.